We will give it another few seconds for all Equity Council members who are now joining us to be able to enter. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, and welcome to our Equity Council panel. Every year, we host an Equity Council panel around February that has a panel of speakers. And we've had a host of different speakers. We've had a member of the community who was over 100 years old and talked about what school was like in their life. We've had Miss Sawyer, who was part of the Brown v. Board case, and she talked about what her life was like. And this year, rather than having one person, there's so much wisdom in Topeka and beyond. We invited several guests who were the first individuals to integrate their particular area of expertise in certain realms of Topeka and in Missouri. So we're excited to have this wisdom amongst us. We also have our Brown v. Board Museum, which often people will work in Topeka and may not visit the museum and realize the wealth of resources right here in our community. So we have Chief Econ with us. We have Mr. Armstrong as well, who's one of our rangers at the museum. And both of them, Chief Econ is now, I believe, in DC, and he actually manages many things related to overall museums and history. So they will be giving some comments about that so you know what resources are available. I do want to say a couple of housekeeping rules. This evening, we have a facilitator, Mrs. Morrissey, the principal of Topeka High. She will be facilitating the conversation. And the rest of us will proceed as panelists. There will be some tag teaming for Ms. Morrissey and I, as I will monitor the chat. If you have questions that you want to put in the chat, for the Equity Council members, you can type them directly in. If you are watching on YouTube or Facebook and you'd like to have a question, just type that question on in, and we have a person monitoring the social media, and they will be typing the question in the chat as well. So your question on social media will pop up on this chat. If you just want to tell folks that you love them or an amen or something that they said, feel free to do that as well on YouTube and on Facebook. With those items, we do ask that everyone turn off their cell phones if you're currently on the Equity Council panel. Once we do start, Equity Council members, so to allow everyone that is watching to really just focus on the speakers, we'll be asking all of our Equity Council members, once this starts and Ms. Morrissey begins, to turn off your screens so that only the panelists, myself, Dr. New, but all of the panelists, we will be the only ones that individuals will see, so that we really just focus on the council members for the rest of this. I do want to conclude my remarks with an extended apology as well to our one of our members of our community. We did have invited as well Miss Montgomery, the mother of Miss Linda Brown. And this evening we spoke with the family, and Mrs. Montgomery will not be able to join us this evening. Earlier, she gave indication that she would be able to, but she can't join us this evening. But first, we want to thank her for her generosity and initial willingness. We also want to thank her family for speaking with us this evening. And we understand that that adjustment needs to be made, and there may have been some confusion in regards to her participation. So this evening, she will not be joining us, but we want everyone here to know that you have a member of the community that's almost 100, whose husband was the lead plaintiff. I believe our flyer said she was, but her husband, Oliver Brown, was the lead plaintiff. And how amazing to know that she is still living right here in Topeka, Kansas, and we are blessed to have her. With the rest of our panelists, we are going to go ahead and begin, and I'm going to turn it over at this time to the amazing principal, Ms. Morrissey. And we will ask that all mutes are taken off for our panelists, and all Equity Council members, please go ahead and mute your video screen at this time.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. It is a privilege to serve as moderator this evening. Very short, I have been in education for 38 years. This is my 12th in Topeka Public Schools. I have been fortunate to serve middle school, high school, and collegiate levels in both urban and Western Kansas, small town America, so I've certainly seen a little bit of everything. I've been involved in the equity work now for just a little over a decade, both at Eisenhower Middle School, where we participated in courageous conversations, and I was blessed to lead that with an amazing staff, and we truly saw changes, and now at Topeka High School. So just privileged to be here this evening. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. New, who I know is going to introduce our panel this evening.
Well, good evening, everyone. We are very excited to have such a renowned group of panelists joining us tonight. And among them, first of all, we have Mr. Rodney Johnson. Mr. Johnson, for many years, has been probably known by the nickname Mr. Topeka High. He is the first African-American male to serve at Topeka High School as the longest serving employee there in a teaching and administrative role. He also started the Black Student Union college tours. I went on many a trip with them, as well as the very first one. And I think that that tradition continued for probably 20 years or more. So Mr. Johnson, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're also honored to have Miss Carolyn Campbell. And I believe that Miss Campbell graduated from Topeka High School. I know she was a Topeka Public Schools student, and she was also a Topeka Public Schools board member, and she is the first and only African-American to serve on the Kansas State Board of Education. She's currently, I believe, the aide to in the Senate to one of the senators, I believe, but in any event, she's a woman who has a lot of experience, a wealth of knowledge. We're honored to have you, Ms. Campbell, here with us. We're also glad to have Mr. Dell Cushenberry. Mr. Cushenberry is the first African-American administrator in Topeka Public Schools to serve as a building principal at all 3 levels. He was an elementary principal, a junior high principal, and then he retired as a high school principal of Highland Park High School. Go Scots. Then we're honored to have joining us Miss Rosalind Miller, and she is from Missouri. She is the first African-American educator in the Grandview, Missouri School District. So we know she has some great experiences to share with us tonight. We are glad to see our dear friend and Equity Council member back with us, Chief Inamini Ekong. We've missed your beautiful smile, but as Dr. Anderson said, he's moved up a level or 2, but he has not forgotten his people here in Topeka. So thank you for joining us tonight. And then certainly his move-in stand-in, Park Ranger Dexter Armstrong. We've called on him many times and he has responded faithfully. He is the facilitator of conversations on race and racism. I was honored to serve with him on a panel last week, and he had some profound things to share with our young people. So we look forward to hearing from him tonight. We always appreciate and honor our superintendent, Dr. Tiffany Anderson, and to be the first African-American woman superintendent for Topeka Public Schools and even in this county, she has set the bar high for anyone countywide to follow. So we honor her. And thank you also, Ms. Morrissey, for this opportunity to introduce our panelists and also to have you chair our meeting on tonight.
Thank you, Dr. New. Would you share a bit about yourself as well? You introduced everybody else.
Oh, I did. Well, certainly. So everybody, I'm Dr. Burl New, and I'm currently the Director of Certified Personnel and Equity here in Topeka Public Schools. You know, as I was looking at the panel, I thought, wow, my lives intertwined with everybody on the panel in one way or another. Went to Monroe School, went to Topeka High School. Mr. Cushenberry gave me the opportunity of a lifetime to be an educator in the role of an administrator. And then Dr. Anderson, words can't express the excellent role model that she has been, and even the cheerleader, not just for the children, but I'm sure all the staff on this in this meeting will also attest to the fact that she keeps us happy to be on our toes. So thank you, Dr. Anderson, for all you do. And really, that's my story. Working with great people.
Thank you, Dr. New. I'm going to kick off the first question, and Chief Ekong, you or Mr. Armstrong, either one could answer this. So I'll let you decide who does that. But could you speak a little bit just historically Can you speak to the times and the incident itself that led to the Brown versus Board lawsuit being filed in 1951, and then ultimately the Supreme Court's decision in 54, and then lead a little bit into what that has meant in educating our students of color?
I'll let Dexter answer the historical perspective of it, and then I'll kind of speak on the relevance of it today.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you for having us. So speaking on the relevance or the historical point of view of Brown v. Board of Education, as you mentioned, 1951, Mr. Oliver Brown filed a court case in regards to his daughter, Linda Brown, not being able to get into school, that school being the Sumner Elementary School, which was an all-white school at one time, was led by Oliver Brown, but was followed by 12 other plaintiffs, so 13 in all, having that same kind of thought process of having their children being able to go to a school or a neighborhood school closer to their household. With that, a lot of people don't realize or understand that Brown v. Board on a Topeka level started here in Topeka. However, it also combined or brought in 4 other court cases from 4 other places. So you had in all 5, but from South Carolina, Washington, D.C., Delaware, Virginia, and right here in Kansas. All filed individually, had their own problems, but then taken up to the Supreme Court in 1954, where they changed the face of the world forever, leading to the ultimate decision saying that segregation was inherently unequal and it had absolutely no place at all within the school boards or school system. So in 1954, they changed the face of the country forever. However, they left more work to do, and the 1964 Civil Rights Act began to help everything else along the way that the 1954 court case at Brown v. Board wasn't able to change. So I'll leave it there for in a minute to be able to go ahead and go from there, and we can swing back around if necessary.
And the bridge of relevance is that Brown v. Board, one, it served as the catalyst to the civil rights movement. I know historically we talk a lot about the civil rights movement, but civil rights probably started when the first African-American slave touched foot in 1619, as far as our fight for civil rights. But as far as for the civil rights movement, capital C, capital R, this Supreme Court case levied what became the strategy to break down the barriers of what we knew as Jim Crow and systemic racism in our country. Not that there hadn't been sit-ins and other huge launch pads long before the 1954 Supreme Court case, but it was just one of the many prongs within the civil rights movement that tried to address what it looked like for us to truly bring about equity, right? And that we started in the school system, but then we had much more to do in the workplace, much more to do in how we paid according to gender, much more about ability, whether you were more able-bodied or not so much. And so today, the question that this court case truly answers is the issue of equity. How well are we doing taking care of our fellow man? How level is the playing field for everyone to actually be able to arrive at the opportunities that should be accessible to all? And if in fact we haven't yet addressed that question, then essentially that's what makes the Brown versus Board of Education court case still very, very relevant.
Thank you, both of you. Mr. Cushenberry, I'm going to take the next one to you and kind of play off of this. So as a role model yourself and having served as a building principal in our district, can you speak a couple of things? Would you talk a little bit about what has changed and what has become better over the years as a result of Brown v. Board, but just as a result of our looking at equity issues? And then talk a little bit about what maybe is still out there that you see may still need to occur as you left us a couple of years ago.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Mr. Cushenberry.
Can you hear me now? Principal Morrissey, I appreciate the question. And as I kind of look back over my career as a student who attended all Black schools and then transferred over to predominantly white schools, a lot has changed. change in terms of access, being able to access the schools that was aforementioned, being able to participate in things that may not have been available prior to that particular case. Now, my own personal feeling is that the case itself, I don't look at it as being good or bad. I look at it as being necessary. It was necessary for the case to be tried so that a person had a right to attend the school of their choice. We still have work to do. You know, the underbelly of this particular nation is seated in racism. And so as long as that's there and not addressed, then it filters over into everything that socializes us and our kids, whether it's the schools, whether it's the churches, and so on and so forth. So really, I think a lot has changed as far as access. I still think we have work to do as far as true inclusion.
Thank you. Dr. Neal, I'm going to come to you along the same line. I know you also served at Highland Park, and you and I have talked at times, but there are a lot of positives that came from that time period. Can you talk a little bit about the impacts of Brown v. Board that weren't intended, such as the teachers in those schools and what has happened over the years?
Certainly. So I was born in 52, and I wasn't even in Topeka in 54, so I did not attend a segregated school. I know y'all surprised I was born in 52. I did not attend a segregated school, but I did attend Monroe School, and much of the landscape of the school was the same when I attended there in 1961 on, with African-American teachers. And we had teachers like Miss Crawford, Miss North, Miss Teresa Counts, and individuals who held the opportunity for education so dear. It was like a treasure, and they wanted to pass that treasure on. So of course it had to be of value. So they would drill us multiplication tables, spelling, learning how to diagram sentences, learning national anthems, learning the Black national anthem, every single verse. Thank you, Miss Teresa Counts. So, you know, there were parts of our education that we got that were rich, that really formed our life and gave it quality that students in other schools probably didn't get because they didn't have those teachers.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, I'm going to take it a little different direction, but I'd like you to speak a little bit about being a mentor as an African-American male here, the things that you did because you saw yourself in that role. And then please speak to why you chose to start the HBC College Tour and what that meant to you and to the students that participated. You're on mute.
As a mentor, I felt that I had a role to young males specifically, and the African American race, that coming from an all Black school, elementary, middle, and high school, that I had an opportunity to see some things that they did not see. I think what really opened my eyes was my first year in education at Topeka Public Schools. It was at a Black History assembly, and there was playing the Black National Anthem, and I stood up. And some of the African American kids asked me, well, why did you stand up? And to share with them what that meant to me and what that song was all about was eye-opening. As I said, coming from New Orleans, predominantly Black, and coming to a predominantly area where I am a big minority, I felt that I should take on a different role and show kids that there's something on the other side of town that you don't know. And the only way you're going to know is that you have to venture out. So Mr. Sheffield started a regular college tour within the state of Kansas, going to schools. And so then I say, well, let me branch out, because I went to an HBCU. And I know that when employees are looking to hire someone Black, they're going to go where Black kids are, as Topeka Public Schools recruited me from Southern University. So that was the foundation of the Black College Tour. And as Burrow said earlier, it lasted for an extent over 20 plus years. And today we have kids all over the world that have had an experience of a Black college tour and got a professional career from that experience.
Happy HBCU grad.
So we're going to ask that all of our panelists are unmuted that are on. And as you mentioned, that how many years were you here in Topeka, Mr. Johnson, overall?
I started in 1983, a 37-year career, 14 as a teacher, 23 as an administrator. I begun my administration through the night school program and then summer school before moving into the division.
Thank you for sharing that and for your many years of service. There was a question that came in off of online and that was sent to me just now, and it was really to Dr. New and I'm going to turn this back over to Ms. Morrissey, but this question, and perhaps to all of those that are involved directly in education, and it was regarding how you described what school was like at that time. And the question, and perhaps Mr. Cushenberry or Dr. New, the question is related to were there some things that were lost that you feel like should currently, Mr. Cushenberry, be in schools today that you experienced when you shared you went to an all-Black school? Someone asked, were there some things lost at that time that you feel should be in schools today? And then I'll turn it back over to our moderator.
I think, to me, one of the biggest differences I see at the all-Black schools, we weren't asked to learn. We were insisted to learn. And many of the people that Dr. New described, and Mrs. Crawford's and so on and so forth, your worst fear is not having your work done and certainly not having it done neatly, because you knew that you were going to stay in a recess or after school and get it done. At the white schools, they would give you an F. There's no learning in an F. And so some of the things that we started when we had our 9th grade academy at Highland Park was to go back to some of those old school values and make sure that you do it neatly. The other thing was discipline. You know, classroom management discipline is one of the #1 concerns confronting new teachers, but very few people understand what that really means. And so during those days, when you came in from the outside, you were entitled to a drink of water and you went straight to the coat room and dusted off your shoes with a cloth that was there. Mrs. Crawford had in her drawer a comb and a brush and a substance called Dixie Peach, and you got your hair together. You went to your seat, you propped your desk open with your ruler, and you better make sure all your pencils are sharpened, your dictionaries where it's supposed to be, and there's no clutter. Then you did the Pledge of Allegiance, and then school began. There was order and high expectations. And I think sometimes as we moved forward, there was this thing about many of, particularly white educators, as to how to approach Black students. And so it became a hands-off instead of a hands-on process. And I think as we move along, and let me just back up and say, there are some outstanding educators who are not Black. And I've been the beneficiary of some and had many in my buildings. So I don't want to put it out there that white educators are not good educators as well. I'm talking about the system that we came from overall, who knew where we had to take it and had high expectations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could direct the next question, is it Mrs. Miller or Dr. Miller? It's Mrs. Miller. I understand you have a very unique story. Would you mind sharing your story about how you became the first African-American educator in Grandview School District?
I am delighted to share that story. I started pursuing my career in 1973, and my first interview was one of the most interesting interviews that I've had. The principal called me in, and he spoke with me. He showed me around the school, and one of the questions that he asked me that really kind of took me off guard is he asked me if I could get along with white people. And I said, of course I can. I came from a very diverse background, so getting along with people was not an issue for me. but I thought that was really interesting. And I told my husband after that interview, I said, I will not be getting a job in Grandview this year. So it so happened that I did not. But one of the things that he put on my interview was the reason why I did not get the job that year is because I did not have a car, and then my husband would have to drive me to work. So what happened is I ended up getting pregnant, and I waited 2 more years before I went ahead and interviewed. And the reason why I interviewed at that time is I heard that they had a new superintendent. So I thought, okay, let me try this. This will be perfect. So I called the school district. I told the school district, I am a patron in the school district. I have students. I have children that I would like to put in the district. And I would to be able to talk to the superintendent so that I can find out a little bit about what the school district is about. So they set the meeting up with me, and I went in and talked with the superintendent. We kind of chit-chatted at the very beginning, and then I actually said to him, well, I really want to tell you why I'm here. And so I went on to explain to him what occurred in my first interview at in Grandview. And so he said to me, he says, well, I tell you what, here's what we're going to do. We are going to put you on the sub list, and you sub for a year so that the principals have an opportunity to get to know you and know who you are. So I not volunteer, but I subbed in a school quite often, probably like 2 or 3 days out of the week. And the principal there asked me to put together a Black History program for him. So I went ahead and pursued that and brought in speakers. And after that year, I was offered a position in another school. The principal that I did the Black History program said to me, I want you in my school. And as soon as I have an opening, I will I will ask you to be part of our staff. So at that time, the following year, I worked at another school. And then the next year, he was committed to his promise. And I entered Meadowmere School, which I taught at for 19 years before I left Meadowmere. So that's how I initially got started into the school district. I had many challenges through the years. And so that was basically how I entered the district.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Ms. Morrissey, can I tag team that and ask Ms. Campbell, quite the distinguished long-term servant supporting education for many years. On the heels of that question, for you, as you look at education, do you feel like there is a double standard or different standard for individuals who want to enter the profession who are African American? And as a community member, we received a question, what can the community do to create change? So there are 2 questions. One, what can the community do? And is there a double standard in your opinion for African Americans to serve truly in any profession, but certainly in education?
My thought on this situation is that we as parents, I'm talking about Black parents, I have too many people, we don't encourage our children to think about education as a profession because of the money situation. And so to me, that's one of the sad things is how we lose a lot of wonderful young minds to other professions rather than being educators. Now, the other thing that I wanted to share was I am a proud product of segregation. And I always say that because there was high expectations every day that we walked into that school building. We were valued. And there is another problem that our educators now, and I'm speaking not I'm thinking especially some of my experiences when I was on the local Topeka Public Schools board, and I would go visit and be in maybe the secretary's surroundings. And I remember this one situation with this little Black boy, and I had always volunteered in the library, and because that in the meeting, because then I can sort of visit and with the children. And so this young little boy, he was mischievous. But anyway, so he was in trouble this day. But I knew his grandparents, I knew where he was coming from. He had problems in his home life. And I asked the secretary, says, I just don't understand him. And I said, well, do you ever talk to him? And so that's what we lost with when we integrated our schools, that I think we, as African Americans, I'm Black folks, that we are nurturing, caring, loving individuals. And so we don't look at a child as that's a problem kid. We look and try to help him and to help him grow. Now you asked me something else and I forgot what it was.
Circle back to that. That's the wonderful thing about having such a seasoned group of panelists. To your point, relationships is important and is key. And as we think about relationships, I'm going to go back to Chief Ekong, and we're going to come back to that question about the community. But you made some really good examples from all of our educators about expectations. Question here in the chat, and I must apologize to those on YouTube. It looks like the setting is such that you might not be able to comment right now on YouTube, but they're fixing that. We're going to get to the question from Dr. Mejia in just a moment, but it looks like, well, her question is really what we're about to ask on this piece of relationships. And Dr. Mejia's question, as we read it, is, and she's a principal, she is from Columbia, but she is the principal of our dual language school. She says, I would like to find out from this amazing panel what you all believe might be the reason for the disproportionate shortage of Black educators in our field. And in what ways could this shortage be addressed? Chief Ekong, do you want to tackle that? And then anyone else, whether Mr. Cushenberry, anyone else wants to tackle that? And then we'll come back to the panel piece as Ms. Morrissey and I tag team this.
For sure. And I'll just say, just to kind of underscore what Ms. Campbell said and what many of the other panelists have said, one of the unintended consequences of Brown versus Board of Education is that we did integrate our schools. I would be remiss if I didn't underscore that Brown versus Board of Education was aimed at leveling the playing field. Black communities weren't flocking so that they could share classrooms with people who didn't look like them. And so it's often a misnomer, because every member of the Brown v. Board generation that I've come in contact with says that they missed their proudly integrated, rather their proudly segregated school because of the relationships, right? Like the same teacher who would teach you algorithms or algebra would show up at your door and have dinner with your family, something that is almost inconceivable right now. And so I think in the climate that we're in, we see the onset of capitalism, and much of what we tell our precious babies about success is associated with their bank account or the number of initials behind their name. And there's been a diminishing of value to teach and to groom, and which essentially starts in the home, right? We could have a whole nother YouTube on how much the first educational experience that is supposed to excite you to get into the classroom starts in the four walls of your home. And where it's missed there, it trickles to the school. And our young babies just learn that if I'm not taught the value of education at home, and I go to school and my teacher doesn't even know how to handle me, why would I ever become the very thing that I despised growing up, right? But I value anything that would make me feel good or, provide me the luxuries of life that unfortunately school didn't prize in me. And so I think the shortcoming of how we encourage our young people is that we've taken away all the the nobleness and the glorification that comes with literally training young people to be the presidents, the doctors, the lawyers, because it all started in the classroom.
Absolutely. It kind of goes back to relationship as well, as you've just kind of circled back to that. I saw you were shaking your head, Mr. Cushenberry. Did you have a comment you wanted to add to that? And even the importance of seeing people that look like themselves in the classroom. Did you have a comment you want to add? And then I know Ms. Morrissey just sent a little note. She had a question from Mr. Lefford, one of our assistant principals. Go ahead, Mr. Cushenberry.
Well, I think it's we're spot on when we talk about relationships. And you can't teach me if you won't touch me and you don't know me. You can teach at me. And the bottom line is, and the other part is beliefs and expectations. Part of the problem when we transferred over to white schools, there was a belief out there that Black students were not capable of doing what white students were. And my sisters and I laugh when we get together for family reunion. We have a little box of old report cards and we go back and look who got the best grades. There wasn't any one of us that got better than a B. And then I looked at one of my report cards and I got a C in physical education. Really? A C in physical education? I was an All-American basketball player. But the fact is, my parents were told that C is a good grade. And what they really wanted to say was C was a good grade for a Black child. And those high expectations, when you lift those roof limits off of young people and say that there's no reason you can't get an A if you do the work. If you show up on time, bring your stuff and do the work and provide the supports. And like was said before, education doesn't begin or nor does it end in a classroom. So what happens at home, what happens in church, all these are things that help put tools in the toolbox of our young people to become educated.
Well said, Mr. Cushenberry. Dr. Anderson, I've got a question for you before you let this get away. But I'd like you to speak a little bit to what it was like to grow up in St. Louis as a young girl and how that experience may have contributed to your passion to serve in urban and inner city school districts and to truly make a difference for kids with challenges. And then if you'd add on what it means to be not only a mentor of color, but a female mentor and a female role model in the current role.
Thank you so much. You all already know me. And so I'm just going to answer the last part of the question and jump back in this distinguished panel while I have them here, because being in COVID, I might not see Miss Campbell at St. Mark's Church for some months, or Mrs. Now I see on Sundays, Mrs. Miller at Sunday school, but I may not see these people in person. But Miss Morrissey, you were so kind in presenting that question. I'll just take to the very end though, why it's important to be a first, because I see Mr. Lefford put in a comment here. Thank you, Mr. Lefford. It says we must reject the soft bigotry of low expectations. Perfect timing for that. So the reason it's important to be the first, because you can't have a second without a first. And so it is so important to be the have the fearless spirit of saying, okay, well, there's nobody here, then it's time for someone to be here. And if your voice isn't at the table, we're not at the table. So that for me is profound. I mean, now that we've had a first Black president, we literally have students now that when you ask them what they want to be years ago, prior to that, would have never said president, and now they say president. Now we have young women saying, I want to be the first vice president, or I want to be the first female president. So in order to dream it, you have to see it. Thank you for that question. With that in mind, I'm going to turn it back to you for Mr. Lefford, but I do see Mr. Johnson was saying amen over there in the background. So did you have a comment you wanted to add her before Ms. Morrissey gets to Mr. Lefford's question?
I think Dale Cushenberry, you were spot on. As our kids walk the halls, they want to be recognized that they do have the potential and they just not another Black kid walking the hall. So keep the bar high, keep pushing them. And they'll meet what your standards are.
Absolutely. Mr. Lefford has a really good question. I'm going to open it up to the panel, so stick your little hand up there if you'd like to answer it. But he says he's curious on your thoughts on the racial zoning ordinances, which have continued in Kansas City until probably the late 1980s, and how those racial zoning ordinances impact our educational system and maybe still impact our educational system.
Can you repeat that one more time about ordinances? And then Mr. Armstrong, I'm going to see if, as the history buff, and we're going to repeat this to see if you'd like to, in general, as you think about also redlining and all of that, if you or Chief wants to comment on this. Can you repeat that again?
Absolutely. First of all, what a fantastic group of individuals to bring to our community tonight. He would be interested in the panel members' thoughts on how racial zoning ordinances, which he believes continued in Kansas City until the late 1980s, continue to impact our educational system. Mr. Armstrong unmuted himself.
I'll go ahead and take it because Dr. Anderson, that's exactly what my thought process was with the redlining aspect of things. So I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with a J.C. Nichols, but out there in Kansas City, he actually has a name named right, or excuse me, a street name named after him. And like, if I'm not mistaken, like the downtown area, and somewhere close to like the Cheesecake Factory in that area down there. But if you don't know who he is, he's responsible for redlining of Kansas City. Redlining essentially is putting that invisible line. If you've heard the saying of you live on the wrong side of the tracks, yeah, that's the wrong, that's that invisible line. So talking about that of zoning and schools and things like that, you have different things that may happen where this zone, if you stay here, you have to pay taxes or money to that specific area of schools. If you stay on the other zone, you have to pay money for that specific area. But if you have all the poor people in one area and talking about paying taxes, you're going to see the result of that in the schools. Whereas if you have all the rich people paying to a school zone, you're going to see the results of that in a school zone. Illegal redlining, yes. However, if I'm following the policy of paying the taxes in my zone, I'm only following the policies in which that are laid forth in my community. So on that, one couldn't quote unquote get mad because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So that within itself is still going on, whether you're seeing it in your face or the undercurrent of things that inner city school zones and things compared to the rules. Whether you want to talk about in Topeka, whether you want to talk about where I'm from in Charlotte, North Carolina, or we can go even bigger, Chicago, New York, places like that, you're still seeing the results of what redlining did. And last thing I'll say, as someone put a date on it in the 70s and 80s, absolutely, when you have things like where people in their deeds are saying no person of color can own this house. Again, redlining on its face value is illegal. Someone saying, hey, I'm not selling you a house because you're Black, because you're white, because you're whatever, discrimination at its finest. However, during that time when people were purchasing houses, they might have purchased that house in the 80s, but most people don't buy houses for 3 years and move out. They buy them for 3, 5, 15, 75 years, and then pass them down the line. So you can't break a cycle if I wasn't invited in, because all the actual thing is doing is just continuing the cycle.
And I'll only underscore that part of the zoning and redlining perpetuated this notion that in most cases, if you were in an all-white neighborhood, it's not that you didn't like African Americans or anyone of color, but it was that you didn't like what they did to the value of your wealth and your generations to come along the way. And so there were these perceptions that were attached to a population of individuals that only exacerbated our race problem. But even more than that, proximity has always been our greatest learning tool. You can't speak for the homeless unless you're close to them. You can't advocate for the farmer unless you know exactly what the farmer is experiencing. And so when you segregate communities in such a way that they can't learn from one another, all that you're left is the blank canvas that oftentimes gets filled with perception. And that was the greatest tool in increasing racism in our country.
And I would like to kind of add a little bit to that. You need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to current legislation that's going on around the country, particularly as it relates to private schools and charter schools and making monies available. On the surface, that looks like a great thing. Your child will be able to attend the school of choice. But what they don't tell you is the unintended consequences of kids not being able to get to those schools, et cetera, et cetera. The bottom line is the public schools will become the residue of kids stuck who don't have the ability to go, even though the money's available. And the majority of the money is going to be available to those people who didn't need it anyway, to be able to further their education in a place of choice. You've got to pay attention, along with the zoning, the redlining, about the legislation that's going on as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cushenberry. That leads us into another question we have from Alicia Julian that I think you can expand on what you've already begun sharing. So as we look to improve diversity and equity as well as inclusion in our schools, what are the hard questions you would encourage us to ask ourselves and our peers to bring about lasting transformational change and really to address implicit bias? And I'll just open it up to whoever wants to.
And I'll ask Dr. New, can you address that? And then in the 15 minutes we have, we will say YouTube chat is working for those that want to submit questions, make comments, and give a shout out. But Dr. New, can you address that question that Ms. Morrissey just posed?
Certainly. So we talk about relationships and how critical that is to helping students know you care enough about them to make them want to care to learn. And Mr. Cushenberry talked about you can't teach a child unless you touch them. So I think that has to be foundational in the ways that we approach how we help kids understand that even though they may not look like us, they are special to us and we value them as a learner. So it doesn't have to be they're the same color. And I often used to say this for myself. Am I really treating that child as if they were my own child? Because if I am expecting that they're going to perform, do their best. I'm not going to say or do something unkind or that will damage their spirit and make them think that even if they weren't successful in this one task that was assigned today, that doesn't mean that they cannot ever become a successful learner. And even as an administrator, the same way, I'd fuss at them like they were my own children. And many of them called me grandma, but it wasn't for a personality type of relationship. It was because I really care about you. I want to see you do well. So if you're misbehaving, I'm going to correct you as if you were my own child. I've even had to correct children in front of their parents and tell the parent, if they talk to you like that, when they get home, call me. I will be there, because that's not going to help them grow up to be a productive adult. So, everybody has their own way of doing it. But for me, the maxim was, am I treating this child as if they were my own child? And that always helped me to approach them from a place of compassion and genuine care for their future outcome.
Thank you. I see some heads nodding from our educators, Ms. Miller and then Ms. Campbell. And Ms. Campbell, there was a question. Someone wanted to know who inspired you to lead and just get involved in politics and all these other areas. Ms. Miller, do you want to add to what Dr. New just shared?
Yes, I did want to add to what Dr. Newell had said, because I think it's very important as educators that, as it has been mentioned before, to have those high expectations and also to go into the ideal that every child can learn. Every child has the ability. And I think our job as educators is to find out how children learn, because each child learns differently. Oftentimes I would hear teachers say, well, this child is not capable of learning. Yes, the child is capable of learning. Our job is to find out how they learn. So I always felt that every child has the ability to learn.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. And on that, heels of that, who inspired you, Ms. Campbell? As you think about every child can learn and people are leave the classroom ready to roll, who inspired you?
First of all, I can go back to my mother, because she was a widow and I had a little brother, but she wanted us both to at least get a high school education. She'd be over 100 now. But she had to quit school at 16 to help her mother get a job. And so I remember when I was 16, I wanted to get a job that summer to help. And she said, no, you enjoy the summer because you're going back to school. Now, as far as getting me involved in politics, working at the Capitol, well, even before then, Barbara Davis, I was at a awake. And she said there were folks that wanted me to consider running for the local school board. And at that time I thought, oh, I couldn't do that. I just didn't think I had the ability or the experience to do that. And so between Barbara Davis and other folks, they kept on me. And then Mr. Onan Burnett, wonderful gentleman. He was a lobbyist at the state capitol, and he was the one that really encouraged me. The first time I ran for office, he paid for all of my signs and all of my literature and everything. And he took me, the deadline was noon on this Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember which. And I had kept saying, no, I'm trying to get them to find someone else. And that day he came into the office and took me down and paid that $5. And so seeing other people that saw something in me is what got me involved in politics. And now I'm just as bold as I can be.
That you are. And that's a really good comment, because Mrs. Miller just said you have to be able to say everybody can learn, everybody can do. So you've had people to say you can do this.
Yes.
Even when you thought you couldn't, you had someone to pay the $5 or someone in the community. How powerful that is. So that's at any age, encouraging others that maybe think they can't do or don't have a voice to speak up, have a voice, and to serve. Is it important to have people of color in the classroom, Ms. Miller, and then Mr. Cushenberry? And if so, why? We currently have underway with Dr. New being in Human Resources, and Topeka has always had a belief in diversity and having diversity. Why is that important? If you were someone that wasn't of color and would wonder why is diversity and recruitment important, what a brief comment would you say, Ms. Miller, and then Mr. Cushenberry?
Well, I think that's important because I think it's very important for students to see people that look like them, that they can relate to, that they can talk with. That I oftentimes found when I was teaching, a lot of times, a lot of the teachers would send me some of the students the African-American students that they were having problems with. And I was, I was with open arms. It never bothered me that they would send the students to me, because that was the opportunity for me to share with them and to get them to understand why they are in school and what their role is, with the expectations. And so I think it's really important that there are people that look like them that they can relate to.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Mr. Cushenberry, I was going to come to you on that question, but there's a second question and we have about 6 minutes left. So I'm going to combine it. And two people asked something very similar. And then that final question, we're going to come back to white privilege. And Ms. Morrissey, she will kind of talk a little bit about this systems that can be put in place to break down bigotry and systems of inequity. And she'll just talk about white privilege. How she addresses it, and she'll take that question wherever she wants and makes that statement, wherever she wants to take that. So with that, two questions came in. One was from Ms. Bowley, our school board member, one of our school board members, also retired educator, and one is from the teacher at the College Prep Academy, and I believe it's in the comment regarding systems. And so I'll combine both of these. Really, it was about the fact that both Armstrong and Econ, this is from Kathy Foster, talked about systems, and Ms. Bowley shared, she also talked about African-American history. So we think systemically, African-American history seems, according to both of these people, Ms. Bowley is a white woman and Mrs. Foster is an African-American woman. And it seems as though history glosses over Black history. And Ms. Bowley specifically asked, shouldn't we be beyond Rosa Parks and other things that we should be teaching. So here's the question. Within the curriculum, what are your thoughts about current history? Do you also feel that it is glossed over? And what kinds of changes do you think should, if any, be made? So do you think currently we're teaching enough about Black history, Mr. Cushenberry?
Well, first of all, if you're not teaching about all history, it's not history, it's called mystery, because there's so many different gaps. And so right now we're teaching mystery. I saw in the state of Utah, they said that Black history does not have to be taught. Let me tell you something. When you're teaching history, it's inclusive. Why would you talk about Thomas Edison and not mention Lewis Latimer? Thomas Edison's bulb would stay on for about 3 hours. Because of a Black man, the filament, we have what we have now. So my point is, without that inclusion on a time frame that it occurs, you have mystery and not history.
All right, on that, that's a perfect segue, Mr. Cushenberry. Boy, you sure are the educator. Okay, I'm trying to write down some of these statements in one sentence to be able to say. So we're teaching mystery. I saw some heads nodding with that. In the interest of time, we're going to circle back to the question about a privilege. And Ms. Morrissey, would you like to make a 1-minute comment? I will give everyone a heads up at 6:30, since we started 5 minutes late with just some housekeeping. And folks on YouTube just got a chance to be able to comment. We will go to 6:35 if the panelists would please indulge for 5 added minutes. Can you give a 1 or 2 minute piece, Ms. Morrissey, about a privilege and just how you've seen that show up and how you break systemic racism?
Absolutely. The Courageous Conversations journey for me was interesting. And the first year through it, it was a tough read. And I think the term whiteness made me feel guilty, frankly. I took it as personal rather than just a state of what was occurring in our schools. And I think the most powerful thing that happened for me that really showed me white privilege was when I realized, leading the conversation at Eisenhower, that although race was in front of me a little bit during the day at school, serving many students of color, working, with the numbers and trying to be more diverse and hire staff that was diverse, I realized that when I stepped into my car at the end of the day, race didn't hit me in the face. I really didn't have to think about it the rest of the time. I could go to the store, go to the bank, I could do all these things, and I didn't have to think about the fact that I was a white female. And I learned as I listened to the stories of people of color that it's almost constantly in your awareness. The things that happen, the stories that were shared were just appalling to me that you would be treated that way. And the best way for me to even relate to it and try to understand has been as a female. I certainly have had to deal with bias as a female in a variety of roles and jobs. So I have to relate that way because obviously it's not a personal experience. But understanding implicit bias is the toughest thing. It's easy to identify the blatant stuff, even as an educator and as an administrator. If someone's blatantly biased, blatantly prejudiced, I can certainly remove that. But it's the implicit bias that shows up in our data. And so I really started there. As you look at your data and you look at the percent of kids failing and the percent of kids who are being disciplined or suspended, and it is not in line with the numbers in your school, you have implicit bias going on because it's not lack of care or intent. Certainly, Mr. Cushenberry alluded to it earlier. I said often, white teachers can be excellent educators of students of color, but they have to work at it, and they certainly have to address those implicit biases that we all have. And I certainly can no longer say I'm not prejudiced. We all have those. What we can do is we can recognize them within ourselves, and we then have to change that. We have to consciously make changes to what we do. And I've learned, you are also correct, Chief Econ alluded to this too. We have to have high expectations. As a female, don't be nice to me because I couldn't do math. I'm a math major. I appreciate people were tough with me and didn't tell me I couldn't do something. And we have to do the same thing for our students. We have to believe in every single student in our class, and we have to continue to address whiteness wherever it occurs for not only race, which is our topic this evening, but every bias that exists out there, and there are many.
Thank you, Ms. Morrissey. She is certainly a powerful voice within Topeka High, but in the community. How long have you been on the Equity Council?
10 years, I believe. 1 year less than the Equity Council's been going. I joined year 2.
All right, and how long have you been serving in Topeka overall?
12 years, at two now, 7 at Topeka High and 5 at Eisenhower Middle School.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, as we kind of bring this piece up together, is there anything that you'd like to comment on, or that just we didn't ask that you were itching to share? And if not, then we're going to close out with just thinking of one word to leave our listeners with, to just resonate for them as you are thinking about either advice or just how you're feeling. But one word you want to throw out there. But first, I'm going to ask, is there anything that someone really wanted to share today or to comment on that was not commented on. We have several individuals, it appears, from members of churches that are church members that several of you all attend that are on our YouTube, it appears. And we have several educators and just community members on with us. So any final comment that anyone wants to say or something they want to speak to?
I would just venture to say real briefly that diversity is not an initiative of the school system or an educator. It is truly a calling of every community. And where you can't find teachers of color in the classroom, you need to find parents, you need to find business partners. And I stress that as a business partner of the Topeka community, that there is no replacement for the community being involved. And I think at the point by which communities disband this notion of the mind your business culture, and we actually start making everyone's business our business, I think we'll start to see the diversification of our schools, of our businesses, of our hiring practices, because we'll be so involved that the numbers don't really matter. And I think right now we're in a culture that is very quota focused because unfortunately too many people are minding their business.
In order to have a collective impact, you must have collective energy working together to transform our community. I always say, seek to understand in order to serve. I love the comments that you mentioned, Mr. Cushionberry, that if you don't know me and don't want to know me, then you really can't serve me, right? If you're afraid to touch me. So, man, we had some just good nuggets here from this panel. We thank you for all this wisdom. Ms. Morrissey, did you have a final comment that you want to share before we throw out that final word?
Mr. Armstrong had his hand up. I wanted him to get to speak his
my apologies. And you were really shaking your head when we were talking about that history piece as well. But Mr. Armstrong, did you have a final comment you want to share, sir?
Absolutely. Just a final comment regarding knowing that we are a time crunch and all that kind of stuff. We at Brown v. Board of Education National Historic Site, this is what we love to do. This is what we get paid to do. And this is what we enjoy doing. So this conversation can be further carried along. Reach out to us, email, give us a phone call, whatever it may be. Hard conversations happen at Brown v. Board, and that's what we're here for. So please let us know if we can help in any kind of way.
I'm glad you said that, because if you are like Miss Miller, a teacher in Grandview, or if you're a church member at a church in Kansas City and you say, I have a student group, especially now that we have so much Zoom, are there still resources? And if the answer is yes, then we'll share your contact moving forward. Are there still resources all those folks can use, sir?
Absolutely. So we do have virtual tours online. We still do virtual programs coming to different groups and things as long as COVID regulations follow. We still can make in-person visits, all kind of things. You let us know how we can help, and we'll see about getting our team enough to be coming or come to you, excuse me.
That sounds great. And I thought I heard you say that it's free as well. If I didn't, I'm just going to add that in there because I think it is. Is that about right? You can just nod. Yes, and that is. Oh, that was a nod. I saw it. All right.
Yes,
and so
free of charge.
All right, so we're going to give, but seriously, people don't necessarily know that. I said it jokingly, but they may think they have to pay for that. And so when we talk about history, there was a good question about curriculum, and it was really about how do we break that down in curriculum and what are some systemic changes? And part of that is just using Brown v. Board and taking that first step, even within the context of the Kansas curriculum. Thank you, Ms. Foster, for that question. As we close on out, we just want to thank our panelists. We know that time is an investment. You just gave us a little bit over an hour of your time, and we thank you for that. And for our seasoned individuals who started off with the answer and then forgot the question, but came back with something even more powerful to talk about your stories, that had a great impact on all of our individuals here. And so we thank you. And all of your stories talk about relationships. Okay, think of the one word that you want to leave people off with. I always say that sometimes carries people moving forward. One word that you are thinking about moving forward. Let me give you about a second to kind of think of that one word. It is 6:37. So at 6:38, we will open this back up for that one word. And then everyone else that is listening on our Equity Council, we just ask that if you give thank yous in the chat and messages, and if you have a word that you're leaving with, Equity Council members, feel free to put it in the chat. We're going to email them the chat conversation later. It is 6:38. One word, Chief Econ.
Proximity.
Ms. Morrissey.
Empowering.
Mr. Cushionberry,
Hope.
Mr. Armstrong,
Intent.
Mr. Johnson,
Believe.
Miss Dr. New,
Encouragement.
Miss Campbell,
Love.
Miss Miller,
High expectation and goals.
and mine will be to serve, service above self, if I had to give a phrase. So with that, again, we thank all of you all for taking the time to inspire so many within and beyond Topeka. Have a safe and blessed evening, and the video will be sent and posted on our Facebook and sent to our panelists. Thank you again.
Thank you.
This concludes our ceremony, or not our ceremony. Well, it felt like a ceremony. Actually, this concludes our event this evening if you're watching live on YouTube. And again, thank you for joining us. Bye-bye, everyone.